environmental advocacy angle. So 17% of the Amazon has been lost in the last 50 years. 46 to 50,000 square miles of forest are lost each year, which is the equivalent to 36 football fields a minute. Soil is eroding 10 to 40 times faster than it can be replenished. The reason for that disparity in measurement is because there aren't really global studies of soil erosion happening. We aren't trained yet as a species to think on a systems level that large. Most soil studies happen at a very site-specific level. 90% increase in global greenhouse gas emissions since 1970, and that's just measurements of CO2. 0.1 to 1% of all species have become extinct each year. And this doesn't sound like a very big percentage, but that actually means that up to 2,000 species disappear forever annually. And that's a very conservative guess, because right now we have discovered and cataloged about 1.4 million species. But some scientists say that the actual count of species, distinct species on the planet, can be high as 100 million. So if there are 100 million species on the planet, and 0.1 to 1% are eradicated each year, that could mean that up to as many as 100,000 species are being lost each year. But when we talk about these things in terms of numbers, we don't really get at the heart of what that means for humanity. While our species might perish, the rest of the world will live on. But when we lose these species, we're losing out on an experience. We are currently facing an extinction of experience. And trees are inherently a human experience. These 3 trees that I have here are in the forest that I grew up in rural northern Illinois, and they are actually my family members' totems. And I don't mean that in a formal sense. I mean that when I was very young, my parents and I each gravitated to a different tree on our property, and that became known as our tree. So the one on the left here is a giant sycamore. This is my father. The one in the middle is a beautiful sugar maple that turns the most glorious colors in probably our entire property, and that's my mother. And the one here on the, I guess that's your right, that's grown almost entirely horizontally, propped up by other trees around it. This is a bur oak, which is actually what the street I grew up on is named after. This is my tree. And this is where I spent hours as a young child with my father. You can see the creek just beyond right there. We'd sit on this tree. It was perfect to sit and watch herons come as the sun set. I grew up about 3.5 miles outside of a town. And so this was my world. And trees are almost everywhere humans are. So this is a map with data provided by the UN FAO. And you can see that trees are almost in every country that humans inhabit. Trees are cities, they're goalposts, they're sanctuaries, they're shelters, observatories, and they are living beings as we are. And when I started asking people about their stories and memories of trees, this became apparent tenfold. I asked people in a variety of ways. First, it was just by word of mouth, like I'm talking to you now. I would share my experience of watching herons with my dad, and then someone would say, oh, we had this great sycamore tree in my yard, and it had a tire swing, and my brother fell off and broke his arm when we were 3, and I got blamed for it. So these stories just happen, they snowball, they continuously form. And so I decided to codify that a bit more, and I put out these posters, Share Tree Memories, and this was really aided by the fact that I was working at the Arnold Arboretum as a visitor center interpreter. And so I was already having these conversations every day with visitors who some loved trees and had grown up around trees and came to the Arboretum every chance they could get, and others had never been in an Arboretum before and didn't even know what an Arboretum was. But they still had these types of memories that were so profound and so ingrained in their thoughts of themselves as people and their experiences of their own environment. So trees are living memory in that we have so many memories that are linked to trees. Music is also a type of memory. And the way that we've notated it in a Western style, I feel hasn't really allowed for exactly what we were discussing before, this interpretive aspect. I mean, of course you can interpret written music as a musician, but you have to go through a series of steps to be trained to learn how to read that music, and it has to be the same way every time. And you are working with other musicians that are caught in this same extremely systematic view of what that piece is. And a good conductor can help you get out of that, but still the level of training to achieve interpretation that feels personal can be years, it can be a lifetime to hit that virtuosic level of interpretation of standard notation. So I began to think about how I could take these memories of trees that I was gathering. I gathered 60 in total, and I did that both at the visitor center through having people just write them down. So I'll pass these around. These are handwritten memories about trees. And then also there was an online form that I sent out to all my colleagues here at the GSD, as well as tons of different listservs around Boston. So I got a lot of memories from people I didn't know personally. And then I realized that part of my process and part of what I valued about this project was going back to this idea of the extinction of experience. How do we talk about that in a way that makes sense, that has connections from person to person? How do I create a system that allows for that connection? So the first step was aided by my lovely partner, Paul, who is manning my camera right now. He wrote me a Python script to give me the raw word count. So basically, I typed up all of these handwritten stories, and the other ones that have been submitted online were in a big spreadsheet. And from that data set, this script just gave me the number of occurrences of the words. How do we tell stories? What words come up most often? Perhaps unsurprisingly, the as a word comes up most often. And then I was faced with the task of deciding, do I include the in the overall word count? That's just an article, does it matter? I decided it mattered, because the way that we structure stories, especially in the telling, directly influences the way we remember those experiences. So I created a tonal system based on those word counts, where low C, and I did this in C major, because C major has no flats or sharps. It seemed to me to be the most open key if I was going to go out of a Western style of notation to something new. So low C was relationships. And part of this was, for me, low notes hit me here, right in the gut, and then as they get higher, they feel like they're centered in my brain. And so I was trying to think about the same emotional response that I could get from words that would map onto the feeling of hearing these tones. So low C is relationship words. So I looked at every single word in this data set in isolation. I tried to tell myself what the word the meant. I tried to tell myself what the word I meant without any context. So I is a relationship word, because to be an I, you have to have a relationship with non-I's and with an I. Mind and emotion words would be words like feelings or happiness or any sort of emotive quality. Body words, some people mentioned their elbows getting scraped or touching the bark of a tree with their hand, so body words. Time words, people often began these memories, as many of us do, in the past tense. So anything that alluded to past tense to future tense sometimes. People who planted trees and were anticipating them coming to fruit. Spaces and places, some people talked about sort of ambient environmental factors or specific places, like the tree on the corner of my block growing up. Action words like climbed or jumped or fell. Things, so just objects, nouns. And then the bits between, which would be those words like the, a, and. And from there, this is just you don't need to read this, but I color-coded my spreadsheets, and I was looking for another metric to sort of create this new basis of a notation system. So that other metric became frequency of occurrence as mapped onto duration. How long should these notes be held for? We already have a tone for the type of word it is, based on my coding system I just showed you. So how long does that get held for? So the word the is held for the longest because it occurred the most often in the series. And then finally, to gather my thoughts, because I am classically trained, I had to go through a filter of notation first to get to something new. So I started writing these things after applying those several metrics to the data set. I wrote them up in Western style notation first. And then I started to think about what that could become and expand into to encompass these ideas of memory and iteration and how memory changes in each telling. And so I got to this idea of rings, like trees. They grow from the center out as our stories grow from a base word out. And then I added color. So this on the left was the first attempt at color. I feel feel like you guys would have interpreted this very differently. Yeah. And that's good and bad. I just decided ultimately this didn't have the fluidity between notes that I was looking for and looking to capture in a new notation system. This seems much more discrete. And I wanted something that would flow a little bit better, that would allow for elasticity between each note in the way that we tell stories with different inflections, with different pauses. And then finally, after I'd done this with every single story in my data set, I looked at them all, I'd gone from the microscopic, looking at every single word, word by word, to looking at the entire context of the story and finding commonalities, and then pairing those together. So these three stories are memories of mothers.